discussion is to help you know how to take notes for the creator section in your class book. So the first thing you need to do is open your class book up to the page that says Creator Notes at the top. There are a couple boxes on this page. One of them says 4 key questions for creator analysis, and those 4 questions are really central to everything we're going to do in this section. And then below that, there's another box that lists all the works of art that you'll be responsible to know on your test. And so you want to keep those in mind too. Okay, so how do you take notes? Well, if you turn to the next page in your class book, you'll see all the little pictures that we'll be talking about as we go through this part. Now, what I do, and you can develop your own system if you want to, but what I do is first number the 4 questions in the box. So I put a little 1 by the first question, how did the artist's personal experiences influence the artwork? And then, as we're going through the paintings, when we answer that particular question, I just put a number 1 by it.
I actually follow the same exact method. Another really important thing to do, besides just putting the number down by the picture, is also putting down the title and the artist, because you are responsible for not only knowing these questions that are so key to understanding these pieces of art, but also knowing who is the artist and what is the title of the actual piece. And the pieces that you are responsible for knowing are in those boxes as well.
All right, the first question is, how did the artist's personal experiences influence the artwork? This is something that we'll bring up a lot, especially for paintings. Frequently, things that happen to them in their childhood or in their young adult life will be themes that come up in their artwork, and that's what we're going to look at there.
And you also see that in music, theater, and all of the other
Right.
humanities that we study.
Exactly.
The second question is, what was the artist trying to accomplish with this art, and is this a new idea?
Yeah, and a lot of the artwork that we're covering here does involve some new idea. That's often why these artists are important and why they had such an impact on the art world, because they were avant-garde. They were starting something new. So frequently, that's going to be a really important question.
The third question is, what was happening in the artist's life at the time this work was created, and did these events influence the artwork?
Right. And for some artists, this is a key question. Like with Frida Kahlo, for example, if you don't ask that question, you're not going to understand her artwork. For other artists, it's not important at all. So one thing to remember is that we won't apply all 4 of these questions to every work of art. Instead, we'll look at the questions that actually are most useful.
And the final question that you're responsible for knowing is, how do the artist's beliefs and values influence this artwork?
Right. And that's important for all sorts of different artworks, but we'll especially look at that when we're talking about architecture. That's the main creator question for architecture. Because generally you don't look at a building and say, does that roof represent his feelings about his mother or something? You just don't do that. But you do talk about their beliefs and values and how you can see their values in the way that they've built the building. So.
But why is it important to actually take notes? And I think that's
Right.
an important issue to discuss. I think the most obvious reason is the grade, because you do have class notes grade, and that's 100 points.
Right. In fact, at the end of the course, you're going to turn in your whole class book, and it's a major project grade to actually show us that you've taken really active, thorough notes on the material in the course.
Yeah.
Now, why would we do something like that?
That's a
Because
great question.
I have students all the time who say, I don't need to take notes. I have a memory that is stellar.
I'm paying attention.
Yeah. So why do we ask them to take
Well,
notes?
I think for me personally, as a theater teacher, I tell my students that they have to write everything down. The best actors and performers are actively involved with the literature. They're writing it down, and it's so easy to memorize it.
Right.
It's just actively engaging with the piece.
Right. When you take notes, you're actually involving your body in the material that you're trying to learn. So it doesn't just become something that your brain is hearing. And we know from research that the more you can involve your body, the more that those things really sink in, the more focus you can give to those things. And college professors tell us frequently that this is one of the skills that students are the weakest at when they get to college. So we're giving them the opportunity to practice before they get to these lecture situations. And
Speaking of practice, why don't we just take a look at one of our paintings?
You are slick.
Thank
Let's
you.
do it.
Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. We looked at this piece. Remember when we did the 20 questions?
Yes, we did.
We asked a bunch of questions about this painting. Let's try to incorporate those 4 key questions when looking at this painting. Okay, so Starry Night, Vincent van Gogh, question number 1. How did the artist's personal experiences influence the artwork? We did discuss the church in the center of the painting. We talked about, and some of you noticed that the church itself had no lights on, where all the other buildings seemed to have lights on. Did Vincent van Gogh have a personal experience with the church that created or allowed him or forced him to turn the lights off in the church. And as you will learn more, Vincent van Gogh's father was a Protestant minister. Correct? And he really tried to be involved with the church and be part of the church, except he struggled.
Yeah, Vincent did.
Vincent struggled, thank you. And so therefore his personal experience with the church, he found another way to find God, and that's through nature and other experiences. But you can take a look at his past experience and his struggles with the institution, and by doing that he turned the lights off in the church. And that's pure speculation, right?
Yeah, well, we actually know so much about Vincent van Gogh because he wrote so much about his life in his letters to his brother. But we do know, it's pretty obvious if you look at this painting, he's got two things sticking up into that infinite sky, that beautiful sky.
That clear point that's going straight up.
Right.
Perfect.
And he seems to be telling us there are two different ways he has found to access this infinite. And one way is through that church steeple, but it only reaches up just barely into the infinite. There's another way that seems to be far more effective, and usually when I ask my students, what that way is, they'll say, well, through that black blob there.
Yeah, mine say it's a fire or something.
Yeah. And it does. It looks like black fire. He deliberately painted it that way. It's supposed to be a cypress tree. He wanted that cypress tree to look like black fire, which to him is kind of a symbol for death. And he's basically telling us that through the natural world, through death, you can access the infinite much more effectively than through the church.
And so therefore we could see his personal experiences, question number 1, and actually his beliefs and values,
That's
question number 4. So in your notes you would put a 1 and a 4 next to this slide and be able to answer, take some notes based on what we just discussed.
Right. And besides those two answers, what else should they have written down next to that little picture in there?
They probably should have first and foremost wrote down the title of the
That's
piece,
right.
Starry Night, and the artist. What was the artist trying to accomplish with this piece of art, and is it a new idea?
Okay, and it is. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what makes Vincent van Gogh such a great artist. He had an idea about how to create art that nobody had had before. And in a nutshell, that idea was that the job of the artist is not to represent the world the way it actually looks, but instead to show other people how he feels about the world that he sees. So this is a much more intimate, kind of personal way of showing any scene. And what you're seeing here is Vincent van Gogh's feelings about that night sky, about the village, about life and death, really.
So it's not as important that what town is this, but it's his reaction to the town, that
Right.
moment in his life, that reaction, emotional
Right.
reaction to it.
And the fact that those stars and that moon don't really look like the stars and moon
Right.
that you see in the sky does not matter at all to Vincent van Gogh. In fact, making it just look realistic would be against his purpose. I mean, that's not what he's trying to do. So.
And question number 3, what was happening in the artist's life at the time this work was created, and did these events influence the artwork?
Yeah, and again, we know quite a bit about what was going on in his life at this time. This was one of the most productive periods in his whole life. He did a whole series of paintings with the same palette, the same colors, the blue, the yellow, the black, the kind of sienna brown that you see there. And he painted them in a fury of activity, hardly slept, hardly ate. And we know from the self-portrait that he did at the same time, he was emaciated. I mean, he looked terrible. He was incredibly skinny. He'd lost a lot of his teeth.
Right.
Yeah. So some of the greatest works of art he did were in this time, but he really sacrificed himself to make those works of art possible.
So now that we've actually talked about how you need to know those 4 questions and how you should take notes and why you should take notes, let's start.
Humanities Online.
That's all, folks.